Good morning, everyone. Welcome to DeviceAlliance's Young Professionals final workshop for 2021. Today, we have a very special guest today, and she's been with other Device Alliance events, including the last two Medtech women's events. Dr. Alessandra Wall, who is a executive coach, psychologist, and the founder of Noteworthy. In 2004, Dr. Wall earned her PhD in clinical psychology at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center at Dallas. And since then, she's worked as a licensed clinical psychologist at psychiatric centers in San Diego and opened her own practice and businesses, including Life in Focus and Noteworthy. And there, her work has sort of transformed more into paid speaking, executive coaching, and she's truly, really focused on helping individuals, especially women, who want to make a difference, to build a legacy and to be valued wherever they are in their life. So Dr. Wall teaches individuals how to build deeply satisfying and successful careers. She helps companies retain their star employees and for them to build inclusive and diverse teams and help them increase their productivity as well as profit. So I've been very lucky to have her as a connection, as well as to have her today for our navigating difficult conversation topics. So thank you so much, Dr. Wall, for being here.
It's Saturday morning, so it's this mix of I'm really excited and I'm like, it's Saturday. Are we really here on a Saturday, people? So I have like all this pressure to make this extra compelling, I hope. I have some requests. So there are a couple of reasons we're going to do this. And one of the reasons has to do actually with psychological safety. It's not just for me. But if you have any video capability, regardless of whether you're having a good or bad hair day, like today, I'm like in 3D, my hair looks great, but in 2D, I really am not liking it, right? But whether you're having a good or a bad hair day, whether you're having a messy background or like me, you're in your son's room, and for any gamers, you'll see like I'm in this gamer chair. I will ask you to please turn on your video. I don't have slides prepared. If there's one thing that I've learned in my career is I try to move as far away as possible from academic style teaching modalities. I think they're too information dense, too boring, and geared at insight but not action. So we're not going to do that. We're going to have a conversation, and we're going to talk about things that have to do realistically with where you are in your professional development and where you want to go. That's what I want to make this conversation about. I'm also a psychologist, so of course I'm going to do that rather than just throw data at you. The only other thing is, for those of you who are multitasking, please don't multitask. It is impossible to like be present while responding to Slack or Discord or email. So if you can, close whatever's in the background browser. I've tried to do that as best as I can. The only distraction I might have is all the other human beings in this house. If you have those distractions, I realize you can't get rid of them. Joanne, that was a really nice introduction. I should just have you walk around with me all the time. You make things sound great, but I think the thing I want to, like, of all the things Joanne said, if there's anything to remember is you can set out in your career thinking that you're going to head in one direction. I thought I was going to be a clinical psychologist, have a clinical practice. I decided to have a PhD versus society because I was like, I want to be a professor at a university one day. I don't anymore. I have no desire to be in the academic world whatsoever. And by the time I was 33, I was like, I don't want to be a psychologist my whole life. I don't want to do this forever. And I thought of nothing else to do. Right. So I made these natural transitions, and I thought I was so strange, like such an outlier to do those things. And then the more work I do with human beings, women and men, and especially people for whom your career is a central part of your identity, the more I realized that journey of changing what you do, of evolving throughout your career is actually really, really common. So you might start in one place and then leverage the skills you have, the value you have, the interests you have in a number of different ways. I think I read a statistic the other day that said most people throughout the course of their career have 4 to 7 different careers. So they just pivot in what they do. So as we talk today, I want you to think about that, because it's crazy to think that we know what we want to be for the rest of our life when we're 20 something, right? and that you will want or need the same things for the next 40 to 50 years of your career. But today we're going to talk about difficult conversations. And before we get to difficult conversations, I figure I wanted to get to know you just a little bit with an easy question. And we're going to do what's called the chat waterfall. This is how the chat waterfall works. If ever you have to do Zoom meetings, this is a great way of being very mindful of like the neurodiversity of the people you're dealing with in Zoom or in a virtual space, right? Some of us type really fast. Some of us take a lot longer to type. Some of us process things rapidly. Some of us need to think a little bit. So I got this question: whether you're celebrating the winter solstice, Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever else is out there, Kwanzaa, whatever out there is to celebrate that involves gift giving this season. What is the one thing you're hoping you'll get gift wise this season? Or the one thing is too difficult. What is one thing you really hope to see show up at your doorstep or as a housewarming gift to a party, whatever it is, right, this season? And so when you're ready, I'm going to have you type it in the chat, but don't hit enter. And then we're all going to hit enter at the same time, and we're all going to take just a minute to read what everybody else wrote. So I'm going to shut up for a second. I'm going to let you type. I'm going to think about what it is for me. I'll be reasonable. So if you've thought of it, if you're ready, I'm going to do 3, 2, 1 count. You're going to hit enter. We should see, especially the larger the group you're in, you'll just see this waterfall of chats, and then we're just going to take 30 seconds to read because I'm super curious. So 3, 2, 1, hit enter. Okay. Let me see. A coffee pot holder. Somebody can get this for Lily. Lily, that is a very reasonable gift. Art essentials. Yashi, what kind of art do you do?
I'm just getting into art. So I've started doing some just normal painting, acrylic paints. And I recently bought color pencils, but I actually want to be able to do digital art. So I'm looking forward to something like that.
Yeah. Okay. We'll talk about this. So I'll talk about why we're doing this in a second. There are 2 reasons we're doing this. Piping tips and bags for frostings. Joanne, you can bake anything for me and send it my way. I love baking. I'm terrible at decorating. Gabriel, what are you going to make with that 3D printer?
I do a lot of testing for my internship right now, and I just like to have extra printers to have running constantly, just so I could keep doing that all the time. I really like 3D printing and getting my hands dirty with testing models and all that. Right now, the one that I have is a little bit slow, so all the help is appreciated.
Gabriel, are you hoping that your internship turns into a full-time job for the same organization?
Not this one. I've interviewed for another internship actually last Wednesday. I hope that one transitions to, well, I hope I get that one first and foremost, and then I hope it transitions into a real job.
Okay. Well, I'm going to throw out a piece of, so I help people interview all the time. And one of the things I'm going to throw out when we talk about interviewing, and we'll talk about this in the context of having difficult conversations, is a lot of time, especially those of us who were raised or brought up in the academic track, when we talk about ourselves, we talk about what we do. We talk about, we give people our CVs, which, let's be honest, it's the most boring thing in the world. I know you've had this, like where you sit down in a class and your professor gives you a syllabus and then they give you a 15 to 30 page CV. And there's something so like, it's so pretentious. I'm like, I don't need to know all the things you're published in. If I wanted to look that up, I could look it up on Google at this point, right? But what is really compelling to people is other people and other people's stories. So personal stuff about yourself. If you, Gabriel, get an opportunity to let somebody in an interview space know, I was recently asked what I would want for the holidays as a gift. And my answer was a 3D printer so I could do more of the stuff I love related to work, like more efficiently. I think that's kind of a winner in terms of dedication and passion. And it's a, you know, it's certainly a more fun way of saying, I really love what I do, or I'm really passionate than whatever jargony stuff you can throw out into the world to talk about it. Okay, I have got this bench that my dog thinks is hers that I really want upholstered. And mostly it's getting somebody else to do the work because I'm just too lazy for it. Melissa, which concert?
Oh my gosh, I love very powerful women concerts like Cher or Pink. Those are like, I was supposed to go to a Cher concert before COVID. And so my dream is to see her before she isn't able to perform anymore, but just like the legends, you know? So
that's the way I feel about Dolly Parton. It's not that I would love all of Dolly Parton's stuff, but I kind of really want to, and she's kind of falling apart right now, but I kind of would really like to see Dolly Parton before, just to say I went. Jacob, a black blazer coat. Where are you heading with that coat?
I just think it's something that would be really nice to have, something I don't have currently. I went to a black tie party and I didn't have like the jacket, so something I need to add. But
yeah,
it's an interesting question. Sometimes it's hard to think about what you want to give or what you want. I don't know.
Well, we're going to be talking about hard things to discuss and hard things to answer, right? So this all, you'll see it all comes in. Jennifer and Instapot, I have one of those and I have to say, like, I made oxtail soup the other day and instead of it taking 24 hours, which is really how long you should like let all those flavors come together, I did it in an hour and a half. I'm like, thank goodness. It made dinner so much more interesting than whatever else I could have planned.
Exactly.
So if you don't have it, and then when you do have it, if ever you want recipes, just message me.
Oh, awesome. Sure.
Assuming we like similar foods, but I love the Instapot. And it was a gift. John, gift cards to where?
You're still muted.
You're muted, my friend. You're like anywhere.
Oops. Morning, everyone. Morning fuzzy brain, so I couldn't really get too creative here. But I figured if I had a gift card, I would decide something creative would come into mind later. So sorry I didn't have the cool answers that everybody else had, but
there's no need to apologize. You had the answer you had, which is, I don't know, something, right? Like that would be my husband's favorite thing to give and probably his favorite thing to receive. He's like, can we just do money at this point in time? Because like, there's nothing I need or want, or the things I need or want, nobody can afford to buy me. He just bought himself a Steinway piano recently. So I think that's about it for what he doesn't need anything anymore. Halil, you were coming in just as we were talking about, if we were to receive a gift over the holiday season, over this end of year season, and I kind of span like the whole gamut, just even celebrating winter solstice and that shortest day of the year, like what would you want to receive? But let me explain why I did this. There are a couple of reasons, and I want you to think about it. I don't know how many of you do this stuff all the time, or maybe are heading labs where you have to do this stuff all the time. But it's really easy, whether it's an interview or whether it's a conversation or whether it's a meeting, to want to jump into the thick of stuff really, really fast. And when you do that, you lose this opportunity to build connections with human beings in a way that will make the conversations you have with them much more meaningful, right? And I don't know you guys, and you don't know me, right? And so this gives me a little bit of insight into who you are and what you like doing. It's a soft start to the day, but it also puts you in this position to feel some of the things we're going to talk about today, which is to like feel a little bit uncomfortable and to feel a little bit put on the spot and to have to disclose about yourself a little bit, but not in a context that hopefully is asking too much at 10:18 in the morning. Now I've been up since 6. So I was looking, I'm like, it's only 8:30. Let's get going, right? But John apparently is still coming out of his fogginess. So it's a byproduct of just being older, probably for me at this point, and having kids. They don't wake me up anymore, but they certainly broke me of sleeping in as a habit.
It's a nice question actually, but so I think thanks for asking. It will be like, I think a yearly subscription of something like, for instance, like learning a guitar. It's, you know, learning a new hobby.
Mhm.
That was actually nice because you know, it could, you know, deliver my free time to actually spend more time with myself, understanding my own, you know, of myself that I wasn't even aware. You know, it shouldn't be like a guitar specifically, but could be anything else. You know, something like different that I haven't, you know, think about.
You are a man to my husband's heart, who's all about constantly improving. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm sitting outside staring into space for the next hour. And he's like, but you could be improving yourself. You could be learning things. So now that we have a Steinway in the house, I'm learning how to play the piano. It's like mentally, it's so difficult. My brain is like, what? I feel like with the 2 hands doing different things. Piyashi is demonstrating like great emotional intelligence and thoughtfulness. So I am not going to say what you said, but she private messaged me to tell me.
I think we missed Samantha's response, and so I wanted to just bring that up.
I like Samantha's response. I saw it and I did miss it. I scrolled past it, so I apologize. Samantha said anything that's wrapped. Anything that's well wrapped, or just anything that's wrapped?
I don't know. I feel like for gifts, it's kind of just like, if you tried, you tried. I don't have anything in particular I'm looking for.
So maybe just this idea that somebody's made an effort, like that what I want for Christmas is to know that people care, right?
Pretty much.
That's a good Christmas gift. Jacob, are you high-fiving her or raising your hand?
I just want to interject and say, Samantha, that I really relate to what you're saying. Like, for it to be wrapped, and especially wrapped nicely, like it just, you know, levels up. It just makes you feel special. So totally get where you're coming from.
I'm right there. I'm a fan of wrapping things beautifully. I can't decorate a cake or a cookie to save my life, but I can wrap really well. And I'm a huge fan of handwritten notes. Okay, so I am resharing in the chat Jamboard. And if you've not used Google Jamboards, there are a number of apps that are like that, but it's just an opportunity for us, and I'll share my screen, assuming I have permission. I think Jeremy said I have permission. It's just an opportunity. It's like a whiteboard, right? And so here's a question I want to ask you. We're supposed to be meeting today to talk about mastering difficult conversations. And we can talk about this in a number of ways. Like, one of the most difficult conversations that I help the women I work with and that I've had to figure out for myself to navigate is how to articulate your value. Literally how to walk into any space, whether it's an interview or whether it's your lab, or for me, right, it's like whether I'm networking or pitching to a prospective new clients, and my clients span like human beings. That's super easy. From one woman to another, to pitch what I do as a coach is really easy, or a corporation, much more difficult for me. Imposter syndrome definitely kicks in. I thought I changed the permission for the Jamboard, but maybe it didn't go through. Anyone with the internet? Let's see. I just didn't press done. Is it changed, Joanne? Yes. Okay. So, so for me, that's one of those things. Like, how do you walk into a room and let people know, this is what I love doing. I'm really good at it. This is the impact I can make. This is why it matters to you, right? That idea of pitching yourself, not because you're bullshitting anybody, but literally because you understand how the skills that you have and what you do can really, really add value to another human being. So that's one category of difficult conversations. But I also, by virtue of working with women, and I work primarily with women in STEM and finance, so two very, very, very male-dominated spaces, two spaces where, and I know STEM is very broad, but where there's still a lot of bias and a lot of things, whether it's microaggression or whether it's just like people who need to learn. Yeah, one of the women I know the other day told me somebody told her she was too spunky. If you're wondering what spunky means, it means that she did not pad an email with a whole bunch of soft language and did not offer to do more work than she needed to do for the person who was asking her for it. So she basically said, hey, the information you're looking for is in this report that you had me work on and write, and so you can find it here. And then she was told by that same manager to be less spunky. So having those conversations, right? Being able to go up to somebody and say, we need to talk about this. What does spunky mean? I don't appreciate being told that I'm spunky, or what is the context for this? Or, hey, if it were John giving you this response instead of a Hannah, would you be telling John to be less spunky, right? So that idea of what a difficult conversation is for any of us can span the gamut. So what I would like us to use the Jamboard for is to just take a few minutes. I'll ask Joanne to play some music in the background and to just start thinking about what are the kinds of difficult conversations that you are bracing yourself for right now, or that you'd like to get ready for, that we can talk about. So I want to make this a discussion, not an information dump. If you want information, I can dump that information. I've got forms, I've got handouts, like that stuff I can disseminate. But it's much more valuable if we make it contextually relevant to you. So I am a huge fan of the Post-it note function on this.
Were you planning to share your screen? And I think permission still hasn't been changed yet.
Everybody's on it though.
Yeah, but we can only view it. We can't edit it.
Ooh, thank you very much. Okay, let's change permissions.
On share.
Yeah.
And then change on the bottom left. Yes.
Yeah.
There you go. And that should.
There we go.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
So yeah, if you can just go to the post-it function right here. And so this is anonymous too. That's a nice thing with the sticky note. If you don't feel comfortable like saying, yeah, I'm the one who said this, but what are some of the difficult conversations, or think of things that are really uncomfortable to you, or you feel kind of anxious about having, or just nervous about having, that might be coming up professionally for you, that you throw under that umbrella of this is, yeah, this one, this is important and it's difficult and I don't know how to have it, or things that come up regularly that you know are going to come back up. Okay. So first of all, I wanna say thank you to everybody for taking the time to. I want to say thank you to everybody for taking the time to like answer these things. And if you look at these, like already just reading them, for me, they're too big. And somebody call this out if you're seeing more, because they're probably more, but they're two huge categories. So one is like, a difficult conversation for me is talking about myself or asking for the things that I want, right? We thought that for me, that falls into the compensation negotiations. We have specifically talking about myself without feeling guilty, about sounding overconfident. This idea of my industry and background don't necessarily match, or the great skills but not enough experience. All of that falls for me under the umbrella of, it's difficult for me to walk into a space and to kind of not just articulate what I do. That's the disconnect between industry and background, or feeling like you don't have enough experience, which is normal. Like you're in the early phases of your career, like you're not going to have as much experience as other people, which does not mean you don't have equal or commensurate value, right? Like the value you bring to the spaces you work in are not necessarily measured by how much experience you have, but how you leverage the experience that you do have for your team, your organization, your project, your mission, right? But that can be really difficult. So that's one category. The other category I'm saying has to do with conflict, like specific conflict. My coworker who's like is just being a little too maybe political at lunchtime in a context where people are probably all trying to just get along. Just, you know, the confrontation, generally confronting other people, giving pushback to parents, asking people to step back when you're leading a team, like that direct conflict where there's actually a problem. And then the other one that I'm seeing is just this setting boundaries, like personal boundaries, learning to say no, asking other people to do more, like talking about the things that you need and being able to talk about those things like effectively. So I am going to, you have your Jamboards in the back, but I like seeing all of you instead of seeing you in teeny and the Jamboard in my face. I'm going to kill the share for a second. And I'm going to ask you, are any of you seeing other things there that I'm not seeing? Other themes? Okay. So here's the thing, is when I look at those, although I mentioned 3 themes, they're really 2 big categories of conversations. And they lend themselves to 2 ways of talking about this. So I am going to take the easy way out and say this, that conversation about who I am and what I bring to the table has to be one of my favorite things to talk about. One of the things that Joanne shared and the email that I sent you guys was entirely focused on that, right? Articulating value. So if you haven't watched the LinkedIn Learning, it's a 35-minute course, or if you're like me and you like listening and watching to people at 2 times speed, it's 17 minutes. I don't think my voice even sounds normal when I listen to the replay. So even anything I film, I listen to myself at 2 times speed and I'm like, oh yeah, there we go, that's normal. That's a proper speed. I would highly recommend listening to it, but I can tell you without feeling guilty and without feeling full of myself is I get messages on a daily basis from professionals around the world about that course. And these are people, some are at the executive level, like we're talking to people who are there late in their career, and some are just starting their career telling me, oh, this was really useful. Oh, this was really helpful. And so if you want to watch that and think about how to apply it to yourself, and then you're like, I would like a format for this, then I'm going to invite you to get in touch with me on LinkedIn. And if you don't have a LinkedIn presence and you're entering the professional world, create a LinkedIn profile. You have to have a LinkedIn profile. LinkedIn is where all professionals go look for other professionals, regardless of your fields, to get a first sense of who you are. And then message me. And then I'll send you the worksheet that I use with my clients. And if you want me to look over your worksheet, I'd be glad to do that with you. Right? That's a 15-minute phone call of saying, okay, but let's talk about how you might have just graduated, whatever, your only experience is working in academic labs, but you want to go work in the private sector, and how you translate the things that you love to do and the skills that you have, and how you communicate it in a way that is clear, that is compelling, and that is relevant to your audience, right? But in order to do that, and to do that well, you're going to need some of the stuff we'll talk about today. So the other category of conversations that you all brought up have to do with like your typical difficult conversations, right? Advocating for myself, pushing back when people are doing things that are that don't work for me, asking for the things I need, right? That category of difficult conversations. So the first thing I'll tell you about that is that throughout your life, and actually on an average day, you're going to have a dozen of these conversations, and you might not realize they are, from the kinds of things that make my kids want to crawl under the table and like bury themselves in the ground, like telling somebody at a restaurant that the food they brought was burnt or inedible, right? They're like, why are you saying something about it? I'm like, I'm saying something very nicely about this. I'm not complaining, but literally it's, and I like, it's too, like it's inedible. I like salt, but we can't eat this. To walking in and being at lunch with somebody and wanting to tell them, hey, can you just like, can we just not have this topic of conversation today? Can we just have a pleasant, like a non-debate driven lunch, right? And that's from somebody who's like uber feminists, and I might still walk into the space and say, can we just not do this today? Right? The first thing you're going to need to have is courage. So I'm going to invite you to unmute yourself and to have somebody give me what their definition of courage is. What's your definition of courage? Because courage is at the foundation of any difficult conversation you're going to have. And there's no wrong answer, but there are better answers. Honest. I mean, if I say courage is yogurt, there's probably the wrong answer, actually, unless there's a yogurt brand called Courage.
I see Melissa has her hand up.
Please just unmute yourself and talk. We're a small group.
Oh, okay. The courage to me is the experience of being vulnerable with what you're about to say, knowing that you might not get the reaction you want, but still saying it anyways, because you have to be true to yourself. It's the vulnerability aspect of knowing that you may not please who you're talking to, but you kind of got to do it anyways because it's important to you.
Melissa, do you read Brene Brown?
Oh, Brene Brown?
Yeah.
Are you talking about Brene Brown? Oh, love her. Love her. Brene Brown, courage and vulnerability, man in the arena. Love that. Love Teddy Roosevelt's thing about man in the arena. It kind of resonates a lot, but it's true. It's the only person you're ever going to disappoint in your life is yourself. And that was a huge reality for me when I learned that lesson. It was like the only one that I'm holding back if I don't speak my truth and my voice. The only one that I'm hurting is myself, because I'm now pretending to be somebody that I'm not to please the person in front of me. And that takes away from me, right? So it's like that. I think right now what I'm looking at is how do you delicately balance that conversation to be respectful to the person that you're talking to, still value them who's in front of you, but not devaluing yourself. I still haven't balanced that balance yet, but that's what, I'm love listening to you, because that's where my mind's going. Well, that space.
I have a process for that, right? Whether it's a good process. This process is born from my work as a psychologist. If you think about being a psychologist, it is like sitting in difficult conversations all day, every day. From the awkwardness of the very first conversation, when you have somebody who's either coming into the office who's an open book, but you're strangers, there's a context for that conversation, right? It's certainly very comfortable. I'm much more comfortable with a patient coming in my office bearing their heart than, I don't know, sitting at a bus stop and having a random stranger and the context hasn't been created for them to bear their heart. Although I'll have to say it happens a lot outside of my therapy space. To like working with people who are really angry, or when I was in graduate school, like working in the ER. So like, how do you talk down somebody who's in the midst of a schizophrenic break, or somebody who's just high as a kite on some kind of methamphetamine, or somebody who's having a massive panic attack, but who's lost touch with reality. Like, all of those things are difficult conversations. It was just really, really clear as you were talking. I'm like, and she reads Brene Brown, right?
I did. How could you tell? Read all of her books.
Just like
love her.
Vulnerability. Okay, so that's one definition, and Melissa gave her definition very specifically to conversations. I personally have a broader definition of it that includes what you're talking about, Melissa. I'm curious, anybody else want to add something to that?
I can say something. I feel like I agree with Melissa, and I would say something on the similar lines, that courage is about, doing something you really believe in, even though all your instincts and every other scenario tells you not to do that, and that it will go wrong. So I would say for me, that's being courageous.
There are elements of courage in that. I can think for us as teenagers, I have 2 boys, so I'm like, for teen boys, sometimes that's not courage, it's stupidity. But as a whole, yes, like as us talking as grown-ass adults with frontal lobes and frontal cortexes that are fully developed, like there's an element to that is very much part of this conversation about courage. How about the rest of you? How about one of the gentlemen in the room? How do you define courage?
being able to address the situation without worrying about the repercussions of your statement, reaction, etc.
Okay. So there's a lot of ideas of like acting despite discomfort. And when I talk about courage, that is the broadest way in which I talk about it. I'm like, courage is the willingness to do things that feel uncomfortable, despite them feeling uncomfortable, right? And uncomfortable can be a lot of things. I'm going to, John, when you think of what you said, I would say, I think it's really difficult to not care about outcomes and to not care about people's reactions. Human beings are social animals by definition. We care what other people think about us. And anybody who tells you they don't, they're lying or they're sociopaths. But they are, right? Like as human beings, if we think evolutionarily, to be an outlier, to be an outcast meant death. So it is very important to belong to the group. It is very important to be liked by the group. It is very important to fulfill a purpose in the group. We have millennia of that built into our DNA. And therefore it's silly when somebody says, well, you should care what people think. I'm like, listen, you care what people think. The question is the person who's thinking this, like, is their opinion the only opinion that matters? What is the impact of their opinion? What is the truth about who you are, what you're saying, what you need, and what you're doing? And if you know those things and you can act despite all the internal fear and discomfort, that is courage. And courage is the precursor to confidence, right? So courage is the willingness to do things that make you uncomfortable or that scare you, to refer, to some of the things that Piaget was talking about. Confidence is not swagger. It's not thinking like you're the best thing ever. Confidence is the belief that you can handle things, right? Confidence is the belief like, okay, I can walk in and I can have this conversation and I'm hoping it'll go well, but even if it doesn't go well, I can handle that too. That is confidence, right? Self-assuredness might be, oh, I'm going to have this and I'm good. Like, this is going to go well. I'm going to make this conversation go well. Like that's confidence mixed with optimism. Maybe that's self-assurance, but confidence is just the belief that like, I can do this. There's a mix of my dissertation was on autonomy and self-efficacy and a bunch of things like that in children with diabetes, but like there's an element of self-efficacy in confidence, just the belief that I am capable of, right, mixed with all of these pieces. So when we're talking about having difficult conversations, one of the things I need you to realize is difficult conversations by their nature are difficult, and therefore by their nature will always, always, always be uncomfortable. And if you're waiting to have one of these conversations to not be comfortable, whether it's pushing back because your parents want you to do something out of love and concern for you, for the most part, right? The vast majority of parents, when they push us, that's what they want. When they hold us back, that's what they want. They just want to protect us. It's out of love and concern. It's going to feel uncomfortable. When you walk into a space and you don't think your colleagues are holding their share of the bargain, they're not doing enough work. You're the workhorse in the group. You're the workhorse in the lab. And being able to talk about that is going to be uncomfortable. There is no situation where calling out people like that is not uncomfortable. Even most leaders and managers find it terribly uncomfortable, right? I think one of the notes on the board was giving and receiving feedback. Giving and receiving feedback is incredibly uncomfortable, right? The only time we don't really find it uncomfortable is often when we are the ones giving positive feedback. But for many people, receiving positive feedback is uncomfortable. I don't like the spotlight. I love the spotlight, by the way. You can all give me as much positive feedback as you want to. First of all, I've learned to accept it and listen to it and use it. But second of all, I'm not that category. But my husband, for example, I know he loves it, but he doesn't. Like, he's so uncomfortable when you compliment him. But the person complimenting rarely feels uncomfortable about giving a compliment, right? So, but receiving and giving, especially constructive criticism, if you manage other people, when you inevitably work with, manage, have to give feedback, have to give kudos to other people, or have to talk to people how to work better as part of a team, super uncomfortable. So that is the big thing I want you to realize. There is no such thing as a difficult conversation that isn't uncomfortable. Your lack of comfort, your anxiety around having this conversation is not the reason not to have the conversation. And if you let that stop you, let me provide you with a reframe. The only person who doesn't get hurt by you not talking is not you, it's other people too, especially if we're talking about in the professional space. Now, we can make this really easy, simply talking about giving feedback. Like if you are leading a team, if you're interested in leadership of any kind, when you get into a position where you get to lead people, if you don't have the courage to talk to people about where they're showing up, how they're not showing up, what they need to do, what the impact of them not showing up is, which is all the pieces of constructive feedback, then you are facilitating that person's failure. You're facilitating that person's failure. You are letting them drown when it is your job to teach them how to swim, or at least to give them the opportunity to practice a breaststroke so that they don't drown entirely, right? And so it's not only you as a leader or you as an individual on a team who might be suffering from this because their lack of skill or their lack of work ethic or whatever is piling more work onto you. You're also allowing them to fail. Think about this with your friendships. Think about this with your significant others, like with your relationships, with your siblings, with your parents. If you let somebody continue doing something to you that annoys you, and just to be nice, you don't tell them because you don't want to be like, you don't want to make them uncomfortable. You don't want to call them out. The inevitable consequence of that is resentment. And the inevitable consequence of resentment is the complete erosion and destruction of relationships. And so when I first started having conversations about being assertive and having difficult conversations, it was often with female patients who weren't speaking up. They weren't telling their friends, they weren't telling their family members that they were upset because they just didn't want to be mean. They didn't want to hurt their feelings, except that they were precipitating an inevitable negative conclusion to the relationship. And then it came into, oh, you're at work and you hate your job and your boss is super toxic, but you're not telling anybody what you need to stay. Well, eventually you're going to leave the company and you're going to screw your whole team over, right? So you're so worried, you don't want to speak up, you don't want to tell people that they're piling too much work onto you because you don't want to be mean, and you like, this colleague and this colleague are dealing with their own stuff, but you're going to burn yourself out so much that you're not going to be able to show up at all. You're going to leave them in a lurch no matter what, right? So bringing your voice. So the other reframe I want you to think about is speaking up, articulating your needs, setting your boundaries. It isn't just about you. It's about being considerate, right? It is about being respectful. So when you get really scared and you feel that courage like waning, just remind yourself, like, having this conversation is about being a considerate human being. It's about being a responsible human being in a relationship with other people. So how do you navigate difficult conversations? So question to you all, what kind of prep, if any, do you do before you have to have a difficult conversation? We have all these things on the background, right? Addressing a situation you're not happy with, like talking to people. I am a crier. So I cannot give a speech for anything that I'm passionate about without like tears welling down and like ugly, like not sobbing, but like I'm not a pretty crier. I get really emotional. So when I get really excited about stuff, I can feel the adrenaline surge because I literally internally will be shaking. And I don't know if it's visible or not, but I can feel, and luckily enough, I'm a psychologist. So I'm like, oh, I know exactly what this is, right? I just got a massive jolt of adrenaline. And since I'm not running, I'm just in the middle of a conversation about something that's really passionate. Like I'm now like kind of cracked out on adrenaline. And if I can relax my body, like maybe I can make this moment pass on. But when I have to have difficult conversations, when I have to fire a virtual assistant, when I need to advocate for somebody I'm working with, when I need to have a conversation with my husband. We've been together since we were 20. So it's 24 years of being together. So you can imagine the number of fights and arguments are still the same that we've been having for 24 years. Like there is an element of bracing yourself to have that conversation properly. The big conversation, there's prep to do. So do you guys prepare when you have big conversations? Those of you who are going to talk to your colleague, talk to colleagues about being accountable, say no. Piache she's nodding. You prepare yourself. What do you do?
I usually, so often, so this is once happened that I faced a bit of sexism. I'm not a person who reacts at the moment. Like I try not to, because I think that's the smarter thing to do. Like when you're too emotionally filled, you say things that you don't mean. So I try not to react in the moment. So what I did was I came back, I cried, and then I wrote down everything I wanted to say. And then in the morning, I cut out everything that was emotional, like which was more fueled by emotion and not probably actually true. And so I cut all that, and then I rewrote what I wanted to write, I wanted to say. And then once I had kind of a script, obviously while talking to my manager, like I didn't go through the script, like I wasn't reading through it, but I had all the pointers I needed. And so I was way more composed. I was confident. I still did have some adrenaline, right? I couldn't breathe. I was on the verge of crying, but I didn't cry because I'd already cried out the night before. And so I always like preparing what I'm going to say and writing it down, and then moving forward. Yeah, that's kind of how I go.
So let me tell you this, that's excellent. Second of all, for those of you who do get emotional, if anybody ever calls you out on being emotional, you can say, yeah, I am. So instead of saying no, yeah, I am. You're getting really emotional about this. I am getting emotional about this because it's important. That's all these emotions indicate. Like whether I'm teary-eyed or blushing, or my voice is trembling, or my voice is going up. Like if my voice is going up and I'm starting to scare people in that aggressive mode, like it's my responsibility to not like go off on people. But I can say like, yeah, let me bring my voice down. I am getting emotional. This is important to me. That's what the emotion is about. Okay. And if you need to prepare a script, prepare a script. There's so many times where I've told clients and patients alike, like write it down, bring the script with you. If anybody makes fun of you for bringing in a written, like, do you really have this written down on a piece of paper? The answer again is absolutely. That's how important this conversation is to me. And I want to make sure I hit my points and I don't get derailed. And I wanted to respect your time. And therefore, yep, I have a script, right? So if you have a sheet of paper in front of you, I'm a big fan of paper. For those of us who are completely digital, I'd like to remind you that studies still continue to show us that handwriting information helps us process it better, including notes for tests. So typing, the brain does not process or retain information the same way as you do handwriting. So if you can grab a sheet of paper, and on that sheet of paper, I would love for you to just put 3 columns, and the headers for each column are why, what, and how. And while you write that, I'm going to explain something to you about just assertiveness scripts in general. So as a psychologist, we spend a lot of time teaching people to be assertive. Assertive simply means it's a motto. It's my personal guiding principle for me. It means you say what you mean and you mean what you say. It's this idea of having the courtesy and the respect to communicate to others what you need. And the beauty with assertiveness is it is tied to self-esteem. So that's a correlational, and it's across, they did a meta-analysis of studies looking at assertiveness and self-esteem, and there's a really strong correlation. They don't understand the directionality of that. So the question, like the question of chicken and egg isn't there, but we just know that people who demonstrate more assertiveness tend to have more self-esteem, and therefore in psychology, a lot of times we work to develop people's assertiveness, which is far easier because it's a technical skill, to help people feel more confident and have more self-esteem. So when we think about that, really it makes sense, because assertiveness is about saying, listen, what I think, what I need, it matters. And that's kind of foundational to the idea of self-esteem. I'm good enough, what I need matters, even if I'm different, even if I'm weird, even if I have faults, like I have value. So the assertiveness script is like this 6-point script. And I was always trying to think about how do we simplify? So I've changed it into a 3-point script. So thinking about a difficult conversation that you are going to have, we're going to start this and you're going to finish it probably on your end. Anytime you have the opportunity to prepare for a difficult conversation, I would recommend you do it. And And the more you practice it, the more you'll be able to flip into this mode when you're the one who's like taken aback by somebody coming to you and bringing something to you that you weren't expecting. And now you're in the midst of a difficult conversation, but you're not in control of that difficult conversation or the timing of it. So the first thing you have to ask yourself is why? Like, why the hell are you going to put yourself in a position to feel uncomfortable, to potentially face conflict, to do something that is going to make you and other people just not feel like very comfortable, right? And the why is never, ever, ever just because I want this other person to know where I'm coming from. So very often when I ask my clients, well, why do you want this person to know this? They'll say, well, I just want them to know where I'm coming from. I just want them to understand it. Let me give you a quick example. Let's say that you're in your team meetings. Every time you talk, you get interrupted. Like without fail, you start talking, you get interrupted. You start talking, you get interrupted. And you approach your colleague and you tell them, hey, can we talk about this? I want to let you know, like, it's on a really regular basis. You cut me when I talk. And that person sits there, you talk to them for a little while, and they're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I did this to you, Alessandra. I'm so sorry. I completely understand how you might feel dismissed or unimportant. And I like, wow. And so clearly that person gets you. And then the next time you go into a team meeting, they start again. Was your conversation successful? Like, clearly not, but you got what you want. If your why was just to be heard, they heard you. So the reason we have difficult conversations is not because we want people to hear us, is we want people to respond. We want people to make changes, right? We really want a behavioral like shift. So I want you to ask yourself, like this conversation that you want to have, what outcome, what shift are you hoping to get from it? Why are you having this conversation? And you can think about it this way. As a result of me having the courage to stand up and tell this person to do this, I am hoping that this will change. That is your why. Part of the reason you want a why is it's going to frame what you talk about and how you talk about it. The other reason you want to know your why is because inevitably you're going to start talking about your side of the issue. And the other person or other people you're talking to are going to talk about their side. And the second they talk about their side, there's a chance for that conversation to get detracted. Right? And so when you have clarity around what your objective is in having this conversation, you can bring the conversation back to that objective. And say, okay, I hear you, I get it, right? We talk in our house about whataboutisms, a lot of whataboutisms. Well, what about them? What about them? What about him? What about, especially with two boys who are 2.5 years apart, but even us as adults, we as adults, excuse me, do it in our house. And so the idea is like, totally want to address that. I want to start here, right? Let me start. I brought this up. Let me start where we started and then we'll get to you, right? So knowing your why is really important and it's central to developing the confidence and the courage to have these conversations. So once you know what your why is, the next thing you need to figure out is what. So what and how we're broken into two parts each, but what kind of pushback are you going to get from the party or parties you're talking to? So depending on how well you know that person, you're going to have pre-conversation, some insight to what their side of the story is, what their needs are, you know, what their style of coming back to you is. So you really want to start thinking about this so that you can start preparing for, we'll talk about the how, so you can start preparing for the how. Okay. So think about this conversation you want to have and ask yourself, these people I'm going to talk to, if it's my parents are, my dad's dead now, but my parents are really old school. My dad was born in 1929. My mom was born in 1939. Dad was born, you know, child of the Depression and the Dust Bowl. My mom was born in war-torn France, Italian immigrants in France. Not a cool thing to be at the end of the war, an Italian in France. We don't often think about it, but even though they moved to France before the war, it didn't matter. Di Gioia was a very Italian name, right? So Axis versus Allies didn't work too much. Their idea of how to perceive in the world was very much fashioned by how and where they grew up. You know, as a family of immigrants and hardworking, and there were all these things. And so on the one hand, the message I got was, you're amazing, you can do everything, but it's like, can you do everything in the context that's as safe as possible? You should become a doctor, right? You should be, or an engineer. My father was an engineer. You should become an engineer, you should become a doctor. So then when I'm like, well, I kind of want to stop leveraging this PhD to be a doctor and be a coach. And, you know, everybody and their mom's a coach. Like everybody who's like, I'm done with life is like, I'll be a life coach. I'll be a health coach. I'll be a nutrition coach. I'll be a career coach, right? I was one of those, everybody and their mother, right? You're going to get pushback. So what's the pushback that you're going to get? Can you anticipate what their perspective is? This is empathy, right? Stepping into somebody else's shoes. So it's practicing your emotional intelligence. And then the other thing I'm going to ask you to think about is, what is that pushback going to look like? So for some people, pushback is going to be a debate. For some people, pushback is going to be them getting very angry and yelling at you. For other people, pushback is literally going to be they start crossing their arms and you just see them getting quieter and closing themselves in. I used to live in the South. My mother-in-law is Chinese, but her family fled after her father was a warlord. Great story. Their family fled China after Chiang Kai-shek, soon after Chiang Kai-shek fell, and then they moved to Japan. So she's, you know, pushback from my mother-in-law, the way it looks initially is this. She smiles, and then you'll get one day this explosion of I do actually love my mother-in-law. She's exceptional, but that's what pushback is. So pushback from her doesn't look like pushback. She's never going to come in and say, you shouldn't do this. She's like, well, okay, it's your life. Like, you guys should do what you want, right? But that's not what she's thinking, and we'll get that later. So this conversation you want to have, whoever it's with, it's like, what is the pushback going to be? What is their perspective on this issue? What are their needs? And then what's it going to look like? How am I going to recognize when I see that pushback come? So let me pause and ask you guys so far. First of all, if you have any questions about this. And second of all, if you need any help, especially with the what or even the why piece on your conversations.
I had a question. So I have the why, but I'm having a very difficult time thinking about the pushback. And I'll tell you the why, and please let me know if you see any types of pushback, because I can't rack my brain of why this would be, why this would be something that somebody would take offense from. And it's, I'll give you a little bit of context as to why I chose this why. The why is the reason why I make, or the reason why I have uncomfortable conversations is because I want to set an environment where people's ideas are respected. And I'll give you context as to why I chose that. So I remember a while ago you asked me about my internship. It's exactly because of this experience. And I have a team lead who has all the right intentions, wants everybody to be working at their highest potential, but the execution is terrible. He expects you to be like that, but does not teach you and give you the necessary tools to reach this level of expectation that he has. And there's a lot of other factors at play, but he does not respect people's ideas in a way where if somebody is giving an idea, he kind of compares it with his and strikes it down if it's not the same. I mentioned a little bit about testing. I do a lot of testing for that internship. And there's a lot of favoritism with a certain design, even though my team works on designs exclusively. We see problems that they don't see, but they're just so adamant that they see everything, and they're not really asking for other people's opinions on whether this design is good or not. And I don't think that's a great environment to have people work in, especially if it's in creative design. I think people's opinions should be at least respected and then understood, instead of just being struck down because, oh, it's not, it's not within my expectations if I'm speaking as a team lead. And it's very frustrating because this person is very competent. He's really good at what he does, but the leadership's just not there. And it's creating this kind of separation between my team and him. And I know some of my members are very hesitant to give ideas because they don't want to be chewed out. I've been chewed out countless of times over the weeks just for sharing ideas and things that, from a perspective of somebody working on testing and designs, I feel like they should take into account. And yeah.
So here's the thing. You already said what the pushback, you get chewed out, right? Think about what the pushback is going to be in this situation. And normally I would throw it back all out to you guys. So if you can think about it as I say it, and if you're like, yep, that's what I saw, or if you see something else, like please unmute. But the pushback is going to be, I don't do that. That's what your pushback is going to be, right? You come up to somebody who perceives themselves as a good leader, right? And you come in and you say, hey, could we talk because these things are happening, and your goal is to invite, your goal is to get them to be more open to other people's ideas and to the way other people proceed. And their goal, what works for them right now, is to do things their way. This is what becomes the most naturally. So the pushback is going to look like two things. I already do that. I don't, right? Like I'm already doing that. I'm already being helpful on whatever, or I don't do that, right? So this natural defensiveness. The thing is, anytime we have conversations with people where we're bringing an issue to them, it is just humanly natural to be defensive. You all do it, I do it too. Sometimes we just need a beat. Sometimes you need a lot of beats to like sit and reflect and go, is this true? And that's assuming we're open to being self-aware. So what I found, I work a lot with leaders, is when, especially when they're not open, when they're not the ones choosing to address a problem and you bring a problem to them, they get really defensive. They take it personally. And it's like, I don't do this, or I'm already trying to do this. Or the way the pushback goes, and it doesn't sound like it's going to be like this for the person you're talking about, because you've already said they chew people out, is to say, oh yeah, I'm really sorry, I didn't realize I do that. I'll pay attention to it, and they do nothing about it. Because they go home and they're wounded, right? Their feelings are hurt. And it's not your job to make sure people's feelings don't get hurt. People's feelings will get hurt, right? That is life. Like in life, if you're not having conversations that are uncomfortable to you or uncomfortable to other people, then you have superficial relationships, right? Like if you're only surrounded with people who think like you, who act like you, who like the same things as you, you've got a problem too, right? You're living in this really, really narrow, like, censored space. So we have to learn to deal with the fact that we're going to bring things to people's attention and their feelings are going to get hurt. They're going to get upset. That we as human beings sometimes all need space and time to process what's told to us. If we can anticipate what the what is, there are two things. We're going to talk about how this translates into the how, but there are two things where this helps. It's like, first of all, when we see it coming, we can recognize it for what it is and go, okay, this person, there we go, they just shut down. Right? So now how I articulate my why is going to change a little bit, because if I want to be heard, and that is the point of any conversation, right? Communication is about an exchange of ideas, a flow, it's about being heard. I am going to need to approach the conversation, approach the discussion potentially differently. So that's the pushback that I think you're going to see. It's that they probably don't perceive it. And if you're able to make them see it, they won't like it because you're telling them they're not a good leader.
1930. All right, let's go. Can I say something too?
Absolutely.
You know, Gabriel, I was a manager for 20 years and, you know, I've had a wonderful walk and I love coaching people, but when people come into a managerial position or a project lead position, sometimes they go in with the assumption that the respect is owed to them rather than earn it. And so sometimes when you start to experience more of these project teams as you further your career, sometimes I consciously go into team meetings and thinking like, okay, what is their personality type? Because you're going to get two types. The ones that actually have the time and take and invest in the person to coach and mold them, those people are rare. And they're like diamonds in the rough, but when you find them, hold on to them because they'll develop you. The ones that I find and I'm just, you know, shooting in the dark. I don't know this person, but it sounds like they have a very boss mentality type where they're insecure within themselves that they can't have the confidence to free flow with the project, meaning they don't have the confidence in themselves to pivot. They don't have the confidence in themselves to know how to adapt and bring others along. They only know how to direct orders and follow their lead. And so it's a leading style that kind of comes down to that I've learned. And I personally can't lead very long under someone like that because I like to share my talents or know that my voice is heard at the table. I like to be creative, but it's just the personality type of who's leading that I've learned that I've had to kind of adapt to and realize like the how and the what. It's like, am I going to change this person? Their style is coming from an insecure place. There's no way that they're going at this point in life, give me what I need. So, you know, I'm not saying I'm not going to share that with them, but I just may not get the return I want because they're not mature enough. I don't know, does that resonate at all? Because they're just thinking of, hey, I got this title, with the title automatically comes a respect, and that's not how it works. Respect is earned, in my opinion.
And I think, and Melissa, the only reason I'm cutting you off is I have an eye on the time.
Okay.
We're good. We're good on time for what I want to present. But I would say, you know, it's a really good example because everything Melissa said is correct. I also believe it's really important to communicate it. If you're going to continue working in a lab or in any working environment with somebody like that, and you want to stay in the company, it's essential, which doesn't mean it's not going to blow up in your face, right? So the outcome doing this does not guarantee the conversation will go well. And it certainly does not guarantee you're going to get what you want. But it is about positioning yourself to have the most constructive potential conversation that you can have, given that you're having a difficult conversation. So for you, Gabriel, given that you're going to leave the lab, it might be a better conversation to have as an exit interview. And then to combine it with, you know, this idea of, let me tell you what you do well, and let me tell you where there are areas of growth. And part of the reason why or what made it more difficult for me to work in this space. Then you can think about, well, what is my why there? My why is to create a better work environment for the people who are left in the lab. And your conversation is not going to change that person, but your conversation is the first echo back that they'll get. And if somebody hears something often enough, eventually there's enough echoes for them to like integrate the message and do something about it, right? It's that thing where you might tell something to a friend and they dismiss you, and then somebody else tells your friend the same thing and they listen to that person. You're like, what the hell? But part of it is you have no sense of whether or not they would have received the message from the second person had they not heard it from you first. It's because it resonates internally. So you're creating that beginning of resonance, or maybe you'll be one of multiple people who are creating an echo chamber for this person where eventually they'll be like, I guess everybody's telling me I kind of suck and I need to like let go of the reins. The other thing is a lot of people are promoted into management, not because they're good managers, but because they're good individual contributors. So because they do their trade well. And so then they think that there's only one way of doing it, the way that I did it that got me this promotion, which is not the case. Okay, so we start with why. Why the hell am I here? Why am I doing this? Be clear about your objectives. Operationalize this. I love when I talk to people who are in a scientific academic background, because I don't need to define what it means to operationalize something. Operationalize it. Don't say, I want to be more respected. I want to be heard. I want to have more freedom. Like, operationalize that. What's it going to look like? How will you know when you get it? What are the things you're going to tell the other person you need behaviorally in order to demonstrate that they are meeting your needs, right? The second piece is what? I need to be very clear about what the other person's perspective is in this conversation. So when I say pushback, it's because inevitably, if I bring something to somebody, especially in a difficult conversation context, chances are they have their own perspective. Their perspective, that is their pushback. It's their internal pushback. And again, that pushback might show up as like aggression. I get really mad. I shut you down. I don't do that. I don't know what you're talking about. Or it might be like what I like to call the Southern thing. Oh, thank you so much for letting me know, right? Because it's just not socially appropriate, or because they're really uncomfortable with conflict. They can't say no, which doesn't mean that internally they haven't just said, nah, I'm not doing that, right? Or it might be a lot of justification, or it might be a lot of emotion, right? Whatever that is the person internally pushing back. And so I want to think about in my mind, like, yeah, but what is it that they want? What is it that they need, right? That's their internal pushback. And how is this going to show up? If I'm somebody who's not comfortable with a yeller, and I know that the head of my lab is a yeller, but I'm anticipating that, I can just go in and go, okay, this person barks, they don't bite, like they're going to yell. This is what's going to happen. I know this script. I'm going to tell them this. They're going to start getting right in the face. Then they're going to start yelling. Like, being able to anticipate how that pushback shows up is also going to allow me to manage the pushback better, which brings me to the how. The third thing you're looking at in trying to map out difficult conversations is how. So first of all, how am I going to bridge the gap between what I want and need and what the other person or persons in this interaction want and need? And this is where identifying what is really important. This is forcing you to problem solve beforehand. So when possible, I want to come in and I want to create a win-win solution for all parties. So if I'm going to say no, right, that was one of the things. How do I say no? I might come into somebody and let's say I go into work and I'm asked to do something yet again, and I got a billion things, and I'm a yes ma'am, and I want to start saying no. I want to be a no woman for once, or to do what I call the mindful yes instead of the pleasing yes. And so my no might be, listen, I would love to do this, and I understand you need this done. Here are the 7 different projects I'm working on, right? And so in order for me to say yes to you, I need to give up one of these things, right? I'm just trying to think collaboratively to how we can bridge the gap between me honoring my need for boundary and space and not being a workhorse for everybody, and your need to get this task done, right? Your need to not get yelled at by your direct supervisor who just told you your team needs to do whatever, right? And position you and go, okay, which one of these other things should I deprioritize? Which one are we going to delegate to somebody else? And maybe that person looks at you and goes, oh, I didn't realize you were working on all those things. I forgot that I'd assigned this to you. I didn't realize you were at this phase. Oh, you're at this phase of the study. Oh yeah, you have no time. You have to be there all the time. I'm thinking of a patient of mine who used to look at eyeballs. She's like, there's this very specific time we have to be in the lab. Like, there's no other time. Like, she can't be tasked with anything else during that time, right? So really thinking about what's the midpoint. If my parents are talking to me and they're really anxious with the choices I'm making in life, and I want to bridge the gap, part of it might mean, first of all, using the work I've done in identifying what to empathize with them. Like, I understand that you guys just want the best for me. I understand that you're really worried. I understand that this track that you see for you is the only track. I want those things too. This is me bridging the gap. Right? Here's some of the things I think I can do that will make that happen. Or, I love you, and do you trust me? Do you think you've raised me well? Do you think that, right? So, thinking about what you know about what you want and what you know about their position to bridge that gap. How am I going to bridge the gap? whether it's providing a collaborative solution, or whether it's bridging the gap through massive empathy. So thinking about the parent thing, sometimes I have to see if my kids were listening because I don't want them to use this with me, but sometimes it's reminding them, like, you're saying you don't think you raised me well. No, we think we raised you very well. Well, no, because you're saying you think my judgment is terrible, that I would do something that would be really bad. But you raised me well. See, I know this. I know you raised me well. I know you raised me to be really responsible. So I'm not making this choice irresponsibly. I've thought this out. Here's my plan. Here's why I want to do it. Let's talk about how I could do this that would make you feel more comfortable. That is me bridging the gap. So your how is to start problem solving for that, because without fail, anytime somebody realizes that they've entered into a difficult conversation, what they expect is a tip for that, what I like to call the yes, but, like ping pong match, yes, but, yes, but, yes, but. So it's ridiculously disarming when instead of you saying, when somebody comes with their pushback, instead of you saying, yes, but me, you go, yeah, I get that. I actually thought about that. I realized that for you, where you use the work you did on the what to demonstrate empathy to them. Totally disarming. And it calms everybody down. And it gives you a power leverage. So the first how is, how am I going to bridge the gap? Is there any way to create a win-win solution for both of us? And if not, how do I show empathy to this person, knowing that I'm going to create a win-lose, win for me? Right? What I don't want to create is a lose. That's terrible. And ideally, if you're entering a conversation like this, you're not going for a lose win. Really, really aiming for the best win when you can. The other how is this. How am I going to stay calm? Because no matter how prepared you are, you're kind of going to, especially with the big conversations, you're kind of going to want to throw up a little bit before you have them. If you're a crier, your eyes are going to well up. Your brain is going to, whether you mean to or not, enter into fight or flight mode, which, yeah, for those of you who like are aware of it, means that your reasoning is kind of going to go out the window. Right? Your ability to think clearly and strategically kind of gone. That's why we prepare so much. Right? And so there are a couple things in the last 4 minutes. Actually, I can give these in 3 minutes so that we can say goodbye at the very last minute. One is breathe. When in doubt, breathe. I'm not saying you need to do a deep breathing exercise. I'm not saying you need to do meditation. I literally mean write on a sheet of paper, put a note on your hand. If you're having this via Zoom, put a post-it note that says breathe and just focus on breathing out. Because when we do get tense, we start entering into fight or flight modes. And so our bodies tense up. We've got that feedback loop between like our physical posture and our mental state of mind. Mental state of mind creates tight physical posture, but also we know this, like anxious or tight physical postures will create an anxious state of mind. So if I can relax my body, I can trick my mind into thinking that I am not confronting some terrible, huge saber-toothed tiger. Right? So breathe out. Don't worry about breathing in, that's reflexive. Breathe out. The other thing is, how am I going to stay calm? That work you did in identifying what pushback is going to look like is going to help you do that. So it's a little bit like, who here, like, just raise a hand, who here likes horror movies? Nobody. Okay, so who here has at least watched a horror movie once? Melissa, no horror movies, huh? Well, for those of you who've watched horror movies before, you know that like the first time you watch them, especially if the score is good, they're terrifying. And then the second or third time you watch them, they provoke some anxiety because you anticipate, you're like, oh my goodness, this is the part where Pennywise is going to jump out of the screen. And then like the third or fourth time you watch them, you're like, oh yeah, like I know what's going to happen. This is the point, like they're going to be watching the video and then Pennywise is going to come out of the screen and right? And so I want you to use your what piece to remind yourself when you see that pushback come, instead of bracing yourself to go, I know this script. I know exactly what this looks like. So their face is going to get red, their voice is going to go up. If I'm talking about my parent, right? Like this is where like my mom's voice gets a little bit more shrill, my dad gets really quiet, or vice versa. This is the point where, right, if I'm talking about my colleague, this is the point where she's going to, well, I guess like we can't talk about anything at work here. Like we have to keep everything so pleasant, right? Whatever it is, you're like, I know what this looks like. And so instead of fearing it, I'm going to use that again to breathe. It's one of the things I'm going to use to stay calm. The other thing is to remind yourself that difficult conversations never get resolved in a single match. Right? So you need multiple matches with multiple sets to get any difficult conversation resolved, because usually you're asking somebody to change a behavior, and behavior change is incredibly difficult. So if you're in the midst of a conversation and it is like blowing up, end it. Hey, it looks like this conversation is going sideways. I've got a lot to think about. I've got a lot to look at. Stop. And invite them to revisit the conversation at a later point and realize you just left with data, right? So no matter how much it blows up in your face, you're armed with data to better manage the second set or the full second match to this conversation. So just to wrap up, right? Having difficult conversations, speaking up requires courage. But over time, the more you practice it, the more confident you will feel. And your ability to manage these, not necessarily for them to go well. Speaking up, asking for the things you need, saying what you mean is a sign of respect and consideration from the people in your world. And not doing it is just really, really, really unkind. So for those of you who are pre-programmed to think I'm just trying to be nice, it's not nice. It's not nice to let somebody do something that annoys you, to let somebody show up as a poor leader, to let somebody show up as a poor colleague, and not give them at least some kind of feedback that will allow them to show up better. Eventually, it will blow up in their face no matter what. When possible, prepare for the difficult conversations. One format for preparing for it is this model that I gave you, right? So the why, what, how. Why the hell am I here? What is my objective in having this conversation so that I can maintain that as my true north throughout the conversation? What does the other person need from the situation, and what is their pushback going to look like? How can I bridge the gap between my objective, my why, and their needs, right? Using all the information I have, and how do I stay calm? And me working on identifying what is going to help me stay calm, because when I see that reaction come, instead of reacting to it, I can respond to it. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any follow-up questions, you know where to find me at this point. My LinkedIn is in there. It's probably the best way of getting in touch with me other than email. But I'm probably responding to LinkedIn stuff more than email many days, simply because it's how I advertise for my business. So I'm on there quite a bit. And good luck. Just like be prepared for the fact that your careers are going to do this over the course of it, and you can only work with what you know to be true today and with what you have today. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Wall. I did drop a feedback Google form. If you can go ahead and kindly fill that out really quickly. Just tell us what we did well and what we can improve on. There's Dr. Wall's LinkedIn as well as her website if you want to connect with her more there. I'll be sending out another email having her information as well if you need to follow up later. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you, guys.